Hey guys, I'd just like to thank everybody who watched my videos over the weekend while I was gone. I wasn't gone very long, but it was a few days. I had to record 4 videos ahead of time, and it was a lot of fun actually. I had a lot of fun while I was out there. So, anyways, I just want to talk about a little bit today is I'm going to try to be doing that kind of stuff more often. Try and, well, record ahead of time, but specifically on the video from Saturday and Sunday, I would like to do more of the kind of historical content. Because to explain where my politics lie and how I kind of formed a lot of my opinions, it's based on uh, actual history and why I'm a pretty centrist dude altogether has mostly to do with me seeing throughout history all the different ways that a government can go bad. And then you can talk about, say, some of the worst kings in the world or some of the worst dictators, both from the right hand perspective and the left hand perspective. Now, I mentioned before that, like, socialism and the funny mustache man from World War II, um, both based it are both based on the same type of ideology. Whereas a right wing authoritarian government is more like a monarchy or an emperor or something along the lines. Someone who believes in righteousness of an ideological cause, usually having to do with religion, not having to do with a secular kind of government that communism and fascism like to ascribe to. Those are more based on controlling economics through, well, uh, socialism is supposed to be controlling economics through the people, but it usually goes through central committees, like what an actual Soviet is like a group of people, and people are involved in these Soviets, and these Soviets form a council, a national-wide council, at some point. Whereas you had the smaller Soviets controlling like local cities, local regions, individual states within the country, stuff like that. And whereas fascism believes that any business automatically should go to serve the people, but through the means that the government specifically adheres to. So there is privately owned businesses in a fascist dictatorship, but as soon as the business stops being uh, or stops producing or doing the will of the party in charge, the government will come in and take it over. You can see how both of those are socialist kind of government, but their means of going through providing goods and services to the people are different. But people have this misnomer that fascism is a right wing ideology without understanding what it means to actually be right or left wing. And again, it has more to do with just being a secular kind of society, but it is a good indicator. It's one of the main indicators to determine whether or not a country is left wing, is if they have a central religion or not, or a religion that a government will um, adhere to or find preferential. Now, there is an argument to be made that again, it's way more than just being whether or not a government is secular or not. For instance, like the United States is technically a secular government, but we don't ban religion. We don't like discourage people from engaging in religion. We have freedom of religion inside the United States, whereas a socialist or a left leaning fascist government will actually start to actively encourage people to not hold any power above themselves besides for the state. which is why they want a secular country. They don't want people to adhere to a morality based on uh, any organization besides the government. They want a because, for instance, if the government tells you to do something and you won't do it because your religion prohibits it, that is a bad thing for a centrally run government. Now, whereas socialism and communism is supposed to have all power go to the people, it's very difficult to have some kind of. It's not a democracy. It's like to enforce any control over people that you can, you have to have weapons and power behind it in order to enforce it. So, whereas, like, all services or all companies or all businesses, all like who builds the roads, who builds like the buildings, the apartment complexes, the factories, etc. All of that in a communist government is supposed to be run by the people, which sounds like that would make it a democracy because in democracies, everyone votes, everyone uh, has input on what the society is supposed to be doing. But there is a huge difference between a democracy and a socialist country. In a democracy, you actually have to vote on it, like all come together and vote, whereas a socialist government is supposed to have more. Instead of having such a formal, excuse me, set of rules and regulations like that. They're supposed to just come together, form like a council of people, and the council is supposed to decide on what to do in a more informal sense. However, that never turns out to be very efficient. So, always in a socialist government, someone will rise to power in order to take over. This is also the huge problem with democracies. You will always have a few men who basically have all the money, or at least a lot of the money, and they will bribe people to vote a certain way. And the majority of people in both a socialist and a democratic country will often oppress the minority, whether in terms of the Soviet Union, they oppressed the Mensheviks, who the Mensheviks were also, in many cases, actually socialist, just as much as the Bolsheviks were. And in like a democracy, there's no smaller minority than a single person. So what would happen in like ancient Athens, for example, is that in their court system they were allowed to have hundreds of jurors. And if somebody didn't like an individual person, they could bribe those jurors to vote a certain way. And I believe this is how Plato met his end. I always forget which Greek philosopher it is, and that's really embarrassing. I really should just memorize it. But he was basically accused of corrupting the youth into a secular worldview, which wasn't really the case. He just had he wanted to explain how nature worked as an element of natural processes instead of acts of a god. He didn't necessarily not believe in an afterlife or in the gods, but uh, that the world was set up in a way that it was running itself automatically is basically how I would describe that. Like, you have the season set up already, and that process was set up millions or billions of years ago. Now, back then they didn't know how old the Earth was. They didn't know that the Earth was like 4.5 billion years old and the universe was 6 billion years old. But they were just basically guessing as best as they could. But this is why I call a democracy it's considered mob rule, or it's considered the majority rules, or the minority being oppressed by the majority. Whereas we have a republic for a very specific reason. Every state has 2 senators. That means they all have equal power. But to not also to allow bigger states with higher populations to have more say, they have more representatives in the House. We are not a democracy in many senses of the word. And there are people in the comments who will argue with me. We are a representative constitutional republic. In nowhere in any of that is there a democracy. For a democracy, even at a city level, okay? At a city level, every single person in the city would have to vote on every single ordinance, every single like city I already said ordinance, every like rule, like when like which street would be repaired, when like what companies we would hire for uh like changing out the street lights or working the fire hydrants or whatever have you. Even at the city level, we still vote in representatives, which is why we're a republic. Each individual person has a day job they have to go to. They have to work in an office. They have to work at the fire department. They have to work with the military. They have to, deliver packages for Amazon or what have you. Or any like green. I was gonna say green collar, which would be military, but I meant to say like blue collar or white collar, green collar. I wonder if that's actually a term. I would actually laugh if that actually is a term for the military. That's generally the color I use when I associate with the military. Anyways, it's completely off topic. Even at the city level, we are a Republican style government. We are not a democracy. Now, we might vote on certain taxes here or there, and that is run by some kind of administrator. Which again, you can have administrators in a democracy, but it's like everyone votes on a certain way, and then the task is given to one person or a group of people in order to enact those policies or to hire the company or whatever. But in our case, most of the ordinances in the city are not determined by the actual people, but by who the people vote in is the one who determines that. So that's why we are actually a republic and not a democracy. And on a federal level, we are definitely nowhere close to being a democracy because of how Congress works specifically. And trust me, democracies are very inefficient. So you have to have each individual person vote on whether or not a law should be passed. So like all those laws that are passed within Congress, and it generally I looked it up before. Congress will go through maybe like 100 to 150 different laws or bills throughout the year. You can look it up because some of them are like continuing resolutions or just renewals. Not a lot of them have like completely new laws made from scratch. Usually they're, uh, like I said, renewals or funding issues. It is interesting to look up the different voting resolutions that they have inside Congress, but for terms of actual legislation, there's not a whole lot, but still 100 to 150 of these resolutions are voted on per year. And sometimes it's way more, sometimes it's a little bit less, but it is over usually a 100. Imagine like every 3 days, yeah, like around like every 3 days or every like 4 days, every single person in the country would have to go to the polls to vote on a resolution. And then even if you combine them together, say you did it like every 2 weeks instead and you would vote on 3 proposals, you can imagine just how like absolutely insane and bureaucratic that system would be. There would be like weeks where a lot of people just couldn't go for whatever reason. And it might even be something as like mundane as being like a holy holiday or something. Like, imagine trying to vote on something like on January 2nd, for example. Like, just after Christmas, just after New Year's, everyone's still recovering from the holidays, and then like three resolutions come up to the vote, and everyone has to try to somehow get to the polls. And that would be completely and utterly insane to try to do. Just imagine it, because at the time, in like Alaska, Michigan, Idaho, like North Dakota, Ohio, Indiana, Minnesota, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Washington, all the states, they would be completely snowed in for a lot of these votes, which is why our Congress is set in Washington, D.C. Because maybe not the best place for it, but because it used to be a swamp, you hardly ever get snow, and they have a good drainage system there, so people can actually, actually get the Congress to vote. The only problems would be the actual like hurricanes during hurricane season, but it is way more convenient and way easier for our country to survive using a republic system instead of a democratic system. Because during like the winter months, a lot of people wouldn't in the northern states wouldn't be able to go vote, especially people who are older or who don't have reliable means of transportation. So the southern states would basically be in control of the country based on what votes were being passed or pushed through. Whereas in the summer months, where it can get very hot and very wet down south, the northern states would be the ones basically putting in the most votes. Again, it would be a very chaotic system to try to run the United States as a legitimate democracy, which is why, look, I know it's a talking point to say that such and such person is a threat to democracy, and they've been pushing that for years, for decades now. But you have to remember that we are not, in any sense of the word, a democracy. We are a republic, and I know that the two things are related. They both come from the same type of ideology, but we are a republic. If you were going to say something like that, you would say such and such person is a threat to our republic, not a threat to our democracy. But the Democrats and even a lot of the Republicans, because a lot of Republicans try to turn this around on the Democrats. And from my personal perspective, if the Democrats are saying that like Trump is a threat to democracy, if you wanted to make fun of them or you wanted to mock them, you would say like Joe Biden is a threat to our republic. And I don't know what democracy they're talking about, but these people are the actual threat to our republic or whatever. I'm not saying that the Democrats are a threat to the republic, but like I'm trying to point out that like when somebody says a threat to our democracy, they should just be made fun of. Like they literally should just be mocked openly. Not because they're wrong, because they're wrong, they're definitely wrong, but because they don't understand what type of government that we actually run around here. The United States being a legit no shit democracy would be, oh, dude, it would be worse than herding cats. It would be awful if we were a democracy. And I'm not saying like it would be like an oppressive government. It would be. It would definitely be, but it would be so bureaucratic, so absolutely worthless, completely and utterly just crippled all the time from indecision and inaction, that nothing would ever get done. Imagine trying to like respond to a natural disaster where everyone in the country had the vote on whether or not we were going to send aid, and then if we were going to send aid, how much money we had to send, and specifically then how that money was going to be spent. like it would be three resolutions on a piece of paper. The first resolution being, shall we send aid? And the answer would have to be yes or no. And if that was a no, the next two resolutions would be completely worthless. Then the second resolution would be like how much money we would be sent, and it would be like a multiple choice answer, like 100 million, 200 million, 500 million, and then $1 billion would have to be on there. Like how much of our taxpayer money would have to be on there, or like how much, or it would have to be like a certain percentage. That would be absolutely insane because then an option might not get a majority vote. Which, if democracy is the control of the majority and you have to have a majority vote, that means when the resolution failed, you would have to like eliminate the two lowest, or at least the lowest option, and then hold another election with just the two most popular options and run it again. And then hopefully at that point you would get a majority vote on it and not a plurality. Oh my god, I say that word so little often. Plurality. Nope, I'm giving up. Basically, like if one resolution, like one option got 33% of the vote and one got 17%, another got 30%, and another got 20%. Okay? The one with the 33% got the most. That's the plurality. Excuse me. But it's not a majority. And democracies usually rely on somebody actually, or a resolution getting a majority vote. Now, ranked choice voting is supposed to stop that, and I made a video on ranked choice voting a long time ago. It might be on my other channel though, so I would like to probably make a new video on that one that's a little bit shorter and a little bit easier to follow. But anyways, I'm trying to get this video out really quick because I realize it's almost 3 o'clock and I need this uploaded now. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. Bye.